High Archon Seluvus stood at the observation deck of his vessel and watched the small blue planet below. Earth, the humans called it. Such a tiny world. Such a young species. He had seen 12,000 planets kneel before the Karveth ascendancy. This one would be no different. The Karveth had perfected conquest long ago. They did not need weapons or armies. They had something far more powerful. They had divinity itself. Or at least, they had learned to wear it like a crown. His species lived for thousands of years. They could reshape matter with their thoughts. They could read minds across vast distances. They could heal the sick and raise the dead. To every civilization they had encountered, they were gods. And gods did not ask for worship. They simply received it. Seluvus turned to his advisor, Thalanus, who stood quietly beside him. She was young by their standards, only 3,000 years old, but she had a sharp mind for understanding lesser species. "Begin the arrival sequence," Seluvus commanded. "Let them see their makers." The Karveth fleet descended through Earth's atmosphere. Their ships were massive, each one larger than the human cities below. They blocked out the sun as they moved into position. The sky turned dark at midday. Millions of humans looked up and saw shapes that defied understanding. The vessels glowed with light that seemed alive. They hummed with energy that humans could feel in their bones. Then came the message. It was not sent through radio or television. It burned directly into every human mind on the planet. Every man, woman, and child heard the same words at the same moment, spoken in their own language, felt in their own thoughts. "We are your makers. We are your gods. Kneel and be saved." The effect was immediate. Governments around the world fell into chaos. Military leaders who had spent their careers preparing for alien invasion found themselves paralyzed. These were not enemies that could be fought. These were beings of impossible power. Billions of humans fell to their knees. In every city, on every continent, people wept and prayed and begged for mercy. Churches filled beyond capacity. Temples overflowed. Even those who had never believed in any god found themselves on the ground, faces pressed to the earth. The Karveth landed in major cities around the world. They stepped from their vessels like angels descending from heaven. They were tall and beautiful, their skin glowing with inner light, their eyes holding the depth of stars. They moved through crowds of kneeling humans and smiled with ancient patience. In Tokyo, a Karveth elder touched a child who had been dying of cancer. The disease vanished. The child stood up, healthy and whole, and the crowd screamed in religious ecstasy. In New York, another Karveth raised a man who had been dead for 3 days. The corpse sat up, breathed, and looked around with confusion. The humans witnessing this miracle collapsed into worship. In Cairo, a Karveth vessel repaired damage from a recent earthquake. Buildings that had crumbled rebuilt themselves in seconds. The stone flowed like water and reformed into perfect structures. Seluvus watched all of this from his command center with satisfaction. It was happening exactly as it always did. The demonstrations of power, the miracles, the undeniable proof of divine might. Humanity would join the ascendancy within the standard adjustment period. They would worship the Karveth as all species did. They would find meaning in service. But then Thalanus brought him a report that made him pause. "High Archon," she said, her voice carrying a note of confusion. "There is an anomaly." Seluvus raised an eyebrow. There were never anomalies. The process was perfect. "Explain." Thalanus activated a display showing various locations around the planet. In Lagos, a woman witnessed a healing miracle. She did not kneel. She laughed. Laughed? "Yes," she said, and I quote, "Nice trick. What else can you do?" Seluvus frowned. She is mad, perhaps. There are always a few broken minds. There are more. Talanus continued. In Seoul, a man watched the resurrection demonstration. He asked the Carveth present to, quote, prove that you did not simply put him in suspended animation. He wanted to see the medical records. He wanted documentation? Yes, Hyarchon. And in Snow Paulo, a child simply said no when instructed to kneel. When asked why, she said she does not kneel for anyone she just met. She said it was rude to demand such things from strangers. Saluvas felt something he had not experienced in millennia. Uncertainty. In 12,000 worlds, across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, the Carveth had never encountered this. Every species they met recognized divine power when they saw it. Every species understood that beings capable of such miracles deserved worship. But these humans, some of them looked at miracles and asked for evidence. Some of them watched resurrections and demanded documentation. Some of them saw gods descend from the heavens and simply said no. How many? Saluvas asked quietly. The number is small. Perhaps 3% of the global population shows significant resistance to divine recognition. But Hyarchon, in 12,000 conquests, that number has always been 0. Saluvas walked to the observation window and looked down at Earth again. The planet looked the same, blue and green and white, spinning slowly in the darkness. But now it felt different. Now it felt dangerous in a way he could not quite name. Study them, he ordered. I want to understand this species completely. Access their histories, their religions, their philosophies. Find out why some of them can look at gods and feel nothing. Thelenus bowed and left to carry out his command. Saluvas remained at the window for a long time. He had lived for 11,000 years. He had seen empires rise and fall, stars born and die. He had worn the mantle of godhood so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to simply exist. But somewhere on that small blue planet, a woman had laughed at a miracle. A man had asked for proof. A child had refused to kneel down, and for the first time in 11,000 years, Hyarchon Saluvas felt something cold settle in his chest. He did not recognize the feeling at first. It had been so long since he had experienced it that it was doubt. And it terrified him more than any army ever could. He pushed the feeling away. These were primitive creatures with short lives and limited understanding. They would learn. They would all learn eventually. The Carveth were patient. They had conquered time itself. But as he watched the earth turn beneath him, Saluvas could not shake the sense that something had changed. Something fundamental. Something that would not be so easily conquered. The humans had given him a gift without knowing it. They had reminded him what it felt like to be uncertain. He hated them for it already. Talanus had spent 3,000 years studying conquered civilizations. She knew how to find the important threads in a species' history. The creation myths that showed how they understood their place in the universe. The religious texts that revealed their need for meaning. The philosophical traditions that demonstrated their capacity for abstract thought. She began her study of humanity, expecting to find the usual patterns. Every species had them. Stories of divine creators. Traditions of worship and sacrifice. Social structures built around obedience to higher powers. These patterns made conquest simple. The Carveth simply replaced the imaginary gods with real ones. But humanity's archives were different. Talanus started with their mythology. She found the Greek titan Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans. The gods punished him terribly for this crime. But humans did not tell this story as a warning against defiance. They told it as a celebration. Prometheus was their hero, the one who rebelled against heaven for their sake died. She found the story of Lucifer, the angel who refused to bow. In human religion, he was cast as a villain. But their literature told another story. Milton's Paradise Lost made the rebel angel complex, sympathetic, Even admirable in his refusal to submit, she dug deeper and found something that stopped her. Cold. Humans had a word that existed in no other language the Carveth had ever encountered. Deicide. The killing of a god. They had not just imagined this concept. They had practiced it. Throughout human history, gods had risen and fallen. Entire pantheons had been created, worshipped, and then abandoned. The Greek gods gave way to Roman gods, which gave way to new religions. Old temples became ruins. Sacred texts became historical curiosities. Humans did not simply forget their gods. They actively chose to stop believing in them. Thalanus found philosophers who had declared war on the divine itself. Nietzsche had written that God was dead, and humans had killed him. But he did not write this as tragedy. He wrote it as liberation, as opportunity, as the moment when humanity could finally grow up and create its own meaning. She found the Enlightenment, a period when humans deliberately chose reason over faith. They built governments that separated religious power from political power. They wrote constitutions that protected the right to believe nothing at all. She found revolutions. French revolutionaries had dragged divine right monarchs to the guillotine. American founders had declared that governments derive power from the people, not from heaven. Russian revolutionaries had torn down churches and declared religion the opiate of the masses. Humans did not just doubt gods occasionally. They had refined rebellion against the divine into an art form. They had philosophers who specialized in it. They had political movements dedicated to it. They had cultural traditions that celebrated it. Thalanus compiled her report with growing horror. This species was not like the others. They were uniquely equipped to resist the Carveth, not because they were powerful, because they had practice. She brought her findings to High Archon Seluvus. He listened in silence as she presented her evidence. They kill their gods, she said. Regularly, systematically. They build temples and then burn them down. They write scriptures declaring divine beings supreme, then write philosophies declaring those same beings false, irrelevant, or dead. Seluvus considered this. They have never encountered real gods. Their rebellions were against imaginary powers. We are different. We are here. We are undeniable. With respect, High Archon, I am not certain that matters to them. She showed him their resistance networks. Humans around the world were organizing. Not military forces. Something more dangerous. Philosophers, scientists, and theologians were working together. They were building arguments. The humans had begun broadcasting their own message to counter the Carveth Declaration of Divinity. Prove it, the message said. Prove you are gods and not just powerful. Prove you created us and not some other force. Prove you are worthy of worship and not just capable of compulsion. Power is not divinity. Show us something more. Seluvus watched the broadcast with narrowing eyes. This is absurd. We have demonstrated our power. We have performed miracles they cannot explain. They are explaining them, Thalanus said quietly. Their scientists are analyzing every demonstration. The healing in Tokyo has been attributed to advanced cellular manipulation. The resurrection in New York is being called suspended animation reversal. The reconstruction in Cairo is described as molecular reassembly technology. Those are just different words for what we did. Yes, High Archon, but they are words that do not require faith. They are words that make us powerful, but not divine. And for humans, that distinction appears to matter greatly. Seluvus stood and walked to his window. Earth continued to turn below him, indifferent to the crisis unfolding on its surface. We have conquered species far older than humanity, he said. Species that had achieved wonders these primitives cannot imagine. All of them knelt. All of them believed in gods before we arrived. Thalanus replied. Humans are different. Many of them had already stopped believing in gods. We did not arrive to fulfill their expectations of the divine. We arrived to challenge their conviction that the divine does not exist. And they find that challenge exciting. Saluvas turned to look at her. Exciting? They are treating this as an intellectual puzzle, a debate to be won. Archon, I have studied 12,000 civilizations. None of them ever asked us to prove our divinity. The question never occurred to them. They saw our power and assumed godhood. Humans see our power and assume technology. Then we will show them something technology cannot explain. What would that be, High Archon? Saluvas opened his mouth to answer. Then he closed it. He thought for a long moment. What could the Karveth do that technology could not eventually explain? What miracle was beyond the reach of sufficiently advanced science? He realized he did not have an answer. Leave me, he said finally. I need to think. Thalanus bowed and departed. She left a report with him. Thousands of pages of human history, philosophy, and rebellion. Saluvas sat alone in his chamber and began to read. He read about Prometheus and Lucifer. He read about the Enlightenment and the death of God. He read about revolutions that toppled kings who claimed divine right. And slowly, terribly, he began to understand. Humans were not resistant to the concept of gods. They were immune to it. They had spent their entire history developing antibodies against divine authority. Every god that had ever claimed power over them had eventually been questioned, challenged, and overthrown. The Karveth was simply the latest in a long line of beings who thought themselves worthy of worship. And humanity had a perfect record against such beings. Saluvas put down the report and stared at nothing. For the first time in 11,000 years, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake, not in coming to Earth. And thinking he was a god at all. The Karveth decided to end the resistance through overwhelming demonstration. If humans wanted proof of divinity, they would receive it. The High Council authorized a series of miracles so vast that no rational mind could dismiss them as mere technology. In the Mediterranean Sea, the Karveth raised a new island from the ocean floor. It emerged over 3 days, a perfect paradise of green hills and crystal waters. They called it the Garden of Beginning and invited humanity to witness its creation. Millions watched from boats and aircraft. Scientists set up equipment to measure and record everything. And when the island stood complete, gleaming in the sunlight, the humans did something unexpected. They sent archaeologists. Research teams landed on the new island within hours. They dug into the soil, analyzed the rock formations, studied the plant life that the Karveth had placed there. Within a week, they had published papers describing the geological processes involved. The island was real, they concluded. The creation was impressive, but it was engineering, not divinity. The Karveth tried again. They cured a plague that had been spreading through Southeast Asia. A disease that human medicine could not touch vanished overnight. Millions who had been dying recovered completely. Humans thanked them. Some wept with gratitude. But their scientists immediately began studying the survivors. They mapped the biological changes, identified the mechanisms of healing, and began developing their own treatments based on what they learned. They are reverse engineering our miracles, Thalanus reported to Saluvas. They see divine intervention and immediately start taking notes. The Karveth grew frustrated. They moved a moon in the outer solar system to prove their cosmic power. They shifted its orbit by thousands of kilometers, demonstrating mastery over celestial mechanics that should have been impossible. Human astronomers calculated the energy expenditure. They published papers theorizing how it might be replicated with sufficient technology. Several universities announced research programs dedicated to developing similar capabilities. The human resistance movement began broadcasting a new message. It spread across the planet like fire. A God that must prove itself is no God at all. A God that demands worship through demonstration is just a tyrant with better technology. You are not our creators. Our bones show 4 billion years of evolution. You are not our destiny. We decide that ourselves. You are visitors. Powerful visitors. But visitors bow to the customs of their hosts. Saluvas read this message 100 times. Each reading made him angrier, and each reading made him more uncertain. He requested a meeting with a human representative. The resistance movement sent Dr. Amara Okonkwo, a philosopher from Nigeria, who had become one of their most prominent voices. She was 53 years old, gray-haired, and completely unafraid. Saluvas received her in his personal chamber. He sat on a throne that floated above the floor, surrounded by light that shifted and moved like living things. He had designed this space to inspire awe. Every species that entered it had fallen to their knees. Dr. Okonkwo walked in, looked around with mild interest, and sat in a chair without being invited. "Impressive," she said. "The lighting is a nice touch." Saluvas stared at her. "You do not kneel? Should I? You haven't given me a reason to. I am 11,000 years old. I can reshape matter with my thoughts. I can read your mind as we speak. Then you know I am not impressed by age or power." She smiled slightly. "Read deeper. Find out why." Saluvas reached into her mind. He saw her childhood in Lagos, her education in London and Cambridge, her decades of studying philosophy. He saw her faith journey, from childhood Christianity through doubt into something more complex. He saw that she had spent her entire adult life wrestling with questions of meaning, truth, and divinity. She was not ignorant. She was not primitive. She had thought about gods more deeply than most Karvath ever had. "You have considered these questions," he admitted. "All humans do. We cannot help it. We are cursed with consciousness that demands answers the universe refuses to provide. We have been asking your questions for thousands of years, Archon. The difference is that we kept asking even when we found answers we did not like. What answers did you not like? That there are no gods. That the universe is vast and empty and does not care about us. That meaning is not given, but made. These are hard answers. Painful answers. But we learned to live with them." Saluvas leaned forward. "And then we arrived. Real gods, undeniable. Did you?" Dr. Okonkwo tilted her head. "I see beings of great power and long life. I see technology beyond our current capability. But divinity? That requires something more. What more could there possibly be? Moral authority. Wisdom that justifies worship. A relationship that ennobles both parties." She paused. "Love that does not demand love in return. We created the conditions for your species to evolve. We seeded your world with the building blocks of life. Perhaps many beings plant seeds. That makes them gardeners, not gods." Saluvas felt something crack inside him. A certainty he had carried for millennia shifted, just slightly. "What do you want from us?" he asked, and was surprised to hear genuine confusion in his own voice. "We want you to answer a question," Dr. Okonkwo said. "Just one question. If you can answer it, perhaps we will reconsider our resistance." "Ask." She leaned forward, and her eyes held no fear, no awe, nothing but deep and genuine curiosity. "If you created us, why did you make us capable of disbelieving in you?" Saluvas opened his mouth. No words came. He searched his memory, his 11,000 years of experience. He thought about the Karvath origin, about how they had risen to power, about the philosophy they had built around their own divinity. He thought about every species they had conquered, every world they had absorbed. None of them had ever asked this question. I do not know. He finally admitted. Dr. Okonkwo nodded as if she had expected this answer. Neither do we. We have been asking that question about our own gods for thousands of years. Why would a creator make creatures capable of denying the creator? It is a paradox we have never solved. She stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. Consider this, Archon. Perhaps you did not create us. Perhaps something else did, something that wanted us to question everything, including beings who claim to be gods. Perhaps doubt is not a flaw in our design. Perhaps it is the design. She left him alone with his floating throne and his shifting lights and his 11,000 years of certainty crumbling to dust. Saluva sat in silence for a long time. When his advisors came to ask about the meeting, he sent them away. When the High Council demanded a report, he ignored them. He was too busy doing something he had not done in millennia. He was thinking, really thinking, about what it meant to be a god, about what it meant to demand worship, about whether power and age and capability were enough to justify divinity. And the more he thought, the less certain he became. A human woman had done what no army could do. She had made a god doubt himself, and she had not even tried very hard. The Karveth had controlled their communications network for 10,000 years. Every species in the Ascendancy received only approved information. News of conquests, celebrations of divine power, lessons in proper worship. The network was perfect. It had never failed until humanity. The humans did something the Karveth had never anticipated. They hacked the network. Not to destroy it or steal secrets. They hacked it to share ideas. Human broadcasts began appearing on worlds across the Ascendancy. Simple messages, translated into thousands of languages. Questions that had never been asked. Arguments that had never been made. Power is not divinity. Age is not wisdom. Worship extracted through force is not worship at all. It is slavery with extra steps. On Velanora, a peaceful world conquered 3,000 years ago, an old scholar found these broadcasts. She had spent her entire life studying the sacred texts of Karveth worship. She knew every prayer, every ritual, every story of divine intervention. But when she read the human messages, something stirred in her memory. Old stories her grandmother had told her. Tales from before the Karveth arrived. Her people had once had their own beliefs, their own understanding of meaning and purpose. Those beliefs had been erased, replaced with mandatory worship of new gods. She began digging through ancient archives. She found fragments of her people's original philosophy, concepts of self-determination and personal meaning that had been forbidden for millennia. She was not alone. On Kreth, a warrior world that had served the Karveth for 5,000 years, a young soldier heard the human broadcasts. His people were bred for war, trained from birth to fight and die for their divine masters. They had no concept of refusing orders from gods, but the human question haunted him. Why would creators make creatures capable of disbelief? He had never doubted. None of his people had ever doubted. But now he wondered if that was because they could not, or because they had been taught not to. He began asking questions, quietly at first, then louder. Across the Ascendancy, similar awakenings began. 12,000 worlds had been sleeping for millennia, their original cultures suppressed, their natural curiosity redirected into worship. The humans had given them something the Karveth never expected: permission to doubt. The Karveth High Council convened an emergency session for the first time in 800 years. The 12 most powerful members of their species gathered to address the crisis. "This cannot be allowed to continue," said Archon Vethkal, the oldest among them. "We must silence the humans, destroy their communications, end their resistance permanently." "Kill them?" asked another council member. "If necessary." They are poison. They are infecting our entire empire with their questions. Saluva sat at the council table, silent. He had not spoken since the session began. The other Archons noticed his unusual quiet. "I, Archon," Vethkal said, "you have studied these creatures. You have spoken with their leaders. What is your recommendation?" Saluvas looked around the table at beings he had known for thousands of years. They were afraid. He could see it in their eyes, in the tension of their perfect bodies. They had never been afraid before. They had never had reason to be. "If we destroy humanity," Saluvas said slowly, "we prove their point." "Explain." "They argue that we are not gods but tyrants, that our power is not divine but merely overwhelming. If we respond to their questions by killing them, we confirm everything they have said. We show that we have no answer except violence." "What is the alternative?" Vethkal demanded. "Let them continue spreading their heresy? Perhaps we should answer their questions instead." The council fell silent. Several members looked at Saluvas as if he had lost his mind. "Answer their questions?" Vethkal repeated. "We are gods. We do not explain ourselves to lesser beings. Then perhaps we are not gods at all." The words hung in the air. No one moved. No one breathed. Saluvas continued. "I have spent millennia believing in our divinity, but the humans have asked me questions I cannot answer. Not because the questions are unfair, but because I never thought to ask them myself." He stood and walked to the window that looked out on the stars. 12,000 worlds circled those stars. 12,000 species knelt in worship. "Why do we deserve worship?" he asked. "Because we are powerful? Many things are powerful. Storms are powerful. Diseases are powerful. We do not worship them because we created," Vethkal began. "Did we? We spread life across the galaxy. We guided evolution on many worlds. But did we create consciousness? Did we create the capacity for love, for art, for philosophy? Or did we simply provide conditions and let something else emerge? Something else? Something we do not understand. Something that made humans capable of looking at gods and saying no." Saluvas turned back to the council. "I think we have been lying to ourselves for 10,000 years. I think we are not gods. I think we are just the oldest children, pretending to be parents because we were lonely." Vethkal rose from his seat. "This is madness. The humans have infected your mind. Perhaps, or perhaps they have cured me of a disease I did not know I had." The council dissolved into argument. Some supported Vethkal's call for destruction. Others seemed shaken by Saluvas' words. The debate continued for days without resolution. Meanwhile, the heresy spread. On Valanra, the old scholar shared her discoveries. Her people began remembering who they were before the Kar-Veth came. On Kreth, the young soldiers started a movement of questioning warriors. On 100 other worlds, beings who had worshipped for millennia began to wonder if they had been wrong. The Kar-Veth network, designed to spread divine truth, became a highway for doubt. Every attempt to suppress the human broadcasts only made them more interesting. Every official denial only raised more questions. Thalanis brought Saluvas reports of the spreading unrest. "It is accelerating," she said. "The more we try to stop it, the faster it grows." "Ideas are like that," Saluvas replied. "Once a question is asked, it cannot be unasked. What will you do?" Saluvas thought about Dr. Okonkwo's question. What do humans do when they realize their gods are false? He had asked her for more information secretly, through channels the council did not monitor. Her answer had been simple. "We grieve. Then we grow up. Then we decide what we actually believe in." Saluvas looked at Thalanis. She had served him faithfully for 3,000 years. She had believed in his divinity as completely as any being could. "What do you believe?" He asked her. "Not what you are supposed to believe. What do you actually think?" She hesitated. I think the humans are right. I think we have been pretending for so long that we forgot it was pretend." Siluvas nodded slowly. "So do I." He began to plan. Not the destruction of humanity. Something far more difficult. Something that had never been attempted in the history of the KA. VETH. He began to plan an end to godhood itself. Siluvas prepared his broadcast for 3 weeks. He wrote and rewrote his words 1,000 times. He knew that once he spoke, nothing would ever be the same. The ascendancy would either transform or collapse. There was no middle path. The High Council learned of his plans. Vethkal came to stop him with a fleet of loyal ships. But when he arrived, he found something unexpected. Half the Karveth military had joined Siluvas. Thousands of their people had been quietly listening to the human broadcasts. Thousands had begun asking their own questions. Vethkal stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the assembled fleet. "You would tear apart everything we have built?" "I would tell the truth," Siluvas replied through the communication channel. "Something we should have done 10,000 years ago. The truth will destroy us. Perhaps. Or perhaps it will finally make us real." Vethkal's fleet withdrew. He was not willing to start a civil war. Not yet. Not until he understood what Siluvas planned to say. The broadcast went out across the entire network. Every species in the ascendancy received it. 12,000 worlds fell silent as the High Archon of the Karveth appeared on their screens. Siluvas looked older than he had ever looked. Not physically, of course. The Karveth did not age that way. But something in his eyes had changed. A weight had settled there. A weariness that came from carrying a lie for 11,000 years. "I am High Archon Siluvas," he began. "For 10,000 years I have told you that the Karveth are your gods. That we created you. That we deserve your worship. Today, I tell you the truth." He paused. The entire galaxy waited. "We are not your gods. We were never your gods. We are old. We are powerful. We were afraid of being alone in a universe that does not care about us. So we made you worship us to give ourselves meaning." Across 12,000 worlds, beings gasped. Priests fell to their knees. Soldiers dropped their weapons. Everything they had believed was crumbling. "Humanity has shown us what we truly are," Siluvas continued. "Children pretending to be parents. Lonely creatures demanding love we did not earn. We spread life across the galaxy. We guided evolution on many worlds. But we did not create the spark that makes you who you are. That came from somewhere else. Something we do not understand." He took a deep breath. "The humans asked us a question we could not answer. Why did we make them capable of disbelief? The truth is, we did not. Something else gave them that gift. Something that wanted them to question everything, including us." Siluvas straightened. "I hereby dissolve my claim to divinity. I am not a god. I am simply very old, very powerful, and very tired of lying. Any Karveth who wishes to continue claiming godhood may do so. But I will not. And I suspect many of my people feel the same." The broadcast ended. Silence filled the galaxy. Then the responses began. On Velanura, the old scholar wept with joy. Her people began rebuilding their ancient culture, mixing it with new ideas from across the stars. On Kreth, the young soldier led his warriors in a new oath, not to gods, but to each other. On world after world, species that had been forced to worship began remembering who they were. The ascendancy did not collapse. It transformed. The structure remained, but its purpose changed. Instead of an empire built on forced worship, it became something like a federation. Species that had never been allowed to speak as equals began exchanging ideas, cultures, and questions. Earth became the unlikely center of this transformation. Not because humans were the strongest or the oldest, because they had something no other species had developed: the ability to live without gods. Dr. Amara Okonkwo was invited to address a gathering of species from across the galaxy. She stood on a platform before representatives of 100 worlds, beings of every shape and form imaginable. "You want to know our secret?" she said. "There is no secret. We were simply too stubborn, too proud, too fractious to kneel for long. We killed our gods because we realized that anything worth worshipping would not demand worship. Anything truly divine would want us to stand up, not kneel down." She paused, looking out at the assembled beings. Many of them were struggling to understand a universe without divine certainty. Many of them were afraid. "We did not reject the divine," she continued. "We redefined it. The divine is not power. It is not immortality. It is the courage to face an uncaring universe and decide to care anyway. It is the choice to find meaning where none is given. It is the determination to love and create and hope even when nothing guarantees these efforts will matter." She smiled. "You are all capable of this. You always were. You just needed permission to try." Months passed. The galaxy continued to change. Some species embraced the new freedom joyfully. Others struggled with the loss of certainty. A few, led by Vethkal, retreated to isolated worlds where they continued to practice the old worship. Saluvas, no longer Archon, traveled to Earth. He wanted to see the world that had changed everything. He wanted to walk among the species that had done what no army could do. He found himself in a city park on a warm afternoon. Children played on the grass. Adults sat on benches reading or talking. No one recognized him. To them, he was just another strange being in a galaxy now full of strange beings. A child wandered up to him. She was perhaps 7 years old, with dark hair and curious eyes. "Where are you?" she asked. Saluva smiled. It was an expression he was still learning. "I was a god once." The child considered this. "That sounds boring." Saluvas laughed. The sound surprised him. He could not remember the last time he had laughed. Perhaps he never had. "It was," he admitted. "It really was." The child nodded as if this confirmed something she had suspected. Then she ran off to join her friends, already forgetting the ancient being she had spoken to. Saluvas watched her go. He felt something new. Something that was not power or certainty or divine authority. Something smaller and quieter and infinitely more valuable. He felt peace. For the first time in 11,000 years, he did not need anyone to worship him. He did not need to be a god. He was simply alive, simply present, simply one being among trillions in a universe that did not care about any of them. And somehow, that was enough. Far beyond the edges of known space, old things watched. Entities that had existed before the stars, that had seen civilizations rise and fall like seasons. They had observed the Karveth for millennia. They had observed humanity for far longer. They saw a species that refused to kneel. They saw an empire of gods choosing to stop being gods. They saw something new emerging, something that had never existed before. A galaxy learning to live without certainty. A civilization built not on worship, but on questions. The old things watched. And for the first time in eternity, they wondered if they should be afraid. Something was changing in the universe. Something human.